Good morning, everyone. Right, okay, so we looked at gender yesterday. We're going to focus around sexuality today in the text. And what we are looking at then, people. Posner and Dakin are going to be our central focus. Obviously, you've got Erwin and Hector, who will also pick up on to a degree within this. But we're going to come back to Erwin and Hector in kind of subsequent lessons. So the focus today is on the two younger figures within the narrative, kind of comparing how they're presented differently. Now, as I say, we're focusing on them, but both of them have exchanges with the teachers within the narrative. So those are also important in kind of exploring issues around kind of gender and sexuality as well. So we were going to focus in on the way that Posner particularly is kind of blocked by section 28 is the kind of implication within this. We'll come back to that in a minute. And the way that kind of Dakin pursues Erwin within the narrative. And Bennett within this, he doesn't just show us the characters within their kind of schooling setting. We do get kind of flash forwards. We do see into the kind of the future here. And this kind of gives us a sense of how they're affected and shaped by those adolescent experiences, what Bennett is suggesting the implications are. And with Posner, we'll just make a kind of brief point about how kind of different adaptations are kind of important. Right, to set this all into kind of context, I've kind of got a couple of questions to kind of pose to you kind of initially. Now, Bennett here does show openly gay characters. Now, in a minute you can kind of debate around this, but do you think that that then makes the play progressive or not? You can start to have a think, have we come across other kind of gay characters in other texts? Has that ever been dealt with in an overt way, or is that only ever something that you're going to be able to kind of suggest and hint at rather than ever make a kind of clear point around? And another question you might spend some time researching, can you come to a point where you have the first openly gay character in a work of English literature? When does that happen? When does that take place? How is it kind of depicted? So have a think about it, do a bit of research around it. That's your first task, people. Spend about 5 minutes just kind of situating it, because it'll help us think about the kind of the history boys. Okay, so hopefully you've had a think about it. We've looked at Hamlet, we've looked at Gatsby so far this year, and you can make the case for a kind of homoeroticism around Hamlet and Horatio that has been played up at various different points. But it's never something overt. The whole thing is, even if you want to argue it, it's kind of completely clouded by his relationship with Ophelia. And it's kind of placed to one side. You can talk about Nick and Gatsby, and again, you can argue a kind of homosexuality to him, his attraction to Gatsby, the kind of masculinization of Jordan Baker. But again, this is only a view and a perspective. It's never overt. It's never dealt with directly. And indeed, if we go back in history, you get figures like Oscar Wilde, who, where you get slightly more explicit implications of homosexuality in The Picture of Dorian Gray. It's actually used in his trial against him. And even then, that wasn't obvious. It was kind of more by inference. You could make anything from it. So in many ways, that Bennett does show these characters directly. They talk about this openly. In many ways, this is progressive. But one of the things that you potentially want to build in around your debate points within this is that, especially for Posner, his homosexuality is not a positive experience. So whilst Bennett is showing it to us, arguably it's not as progressive as maybe it appears, because it's still shown as a kind of limiting factor, something that kind of pains the individual as part of it. The other thing to bear in mind, obviously, Bennett himself is gay, so he's kind of potentially reflecting in those kind of experiences of repression that he's gone through. You should all have read the kind of article, the one in the eyesight with the badly scanned in page in the middle, where he actually kind of identifies himself with Posner, and that's something you might bring into your coursework as well. In terms of the earliest work of literature with kind of an openly gay character, that's a kind of debatable point. It depends how kind of commercially successful you want to go with that. I found a nice interesting article on the kind of Guardian website where there are some kind of outliers in relation to this as you go back to kind of contemporaries to Jane Austen, the diaries of Anne Lister. But it's really not until the turn over into the 1900s that you get anything that in any way starts to openly kind of deal with LGBT kind of ideas and issues. So just to kind of set this up, if you kind of take this bit from very early on in the play on page 5, A. Houseman, and the kind of exchange here between Actar, Hector, Timms, and the way it kind of comes across. Anyway, sorry. So sort of Bennett across the play has a number of kind of literary figures referenced. You get A. Houseman here, we get Auden later on, we get Wittgenstein. So we get a lot, and very often these are kind of other homosexual figures. Houseman, we don't get kind of direct evidence again, but the attitude that comes across here, wasn't he a Nancy, sir? So instantly, right at the start of the play, we show a kind of prejudicial attitude coming through from the students. You get that kind of disparaging kind of sexualized term, and Hector kind of challenges on this: foul, festering, grubby mind, little trollop, do not use that word. And obviously the abusive kind of hitting him on the head with the exercise book, but it kind of sets the tone for the play that follows. Essentially, it shows us very early on the kind of marginalisation and the problems that the kind of gay community face within this kind of educational sphere. So what I want you to do, I want you to kind of take a page or a couple of pages. I will go through this, but please, you should be finding these things. I'm only going to be selective on kind of the evidence that I'm able to pick out. So there's much more you could kind of pick out here from this. Both Posner and Dakin are presented, well, Posner is obviously openly gay or kind of exploring his homosexuality, kind of comes out within the play. Dakin presented as kind of more of a kind of bisexual individual. His sexuality is kind of different from Posner's essentially, but both of them cross over from kind of norms of sexuality or kind of established societal norms of sexuality even. So what I want you to do, I want you to use the whole play. It's not a very long play. You should be able to skip backwards and forwards. You should be able to just look up, wherever you see Posner and Dakin's name popping into the narrative, just check over that section. I want you to kind of profile them in relation to their kind of the way their sexuality is presented. I want you to be able to talk about how it's different, how it's, maybe there's some similarity, but I think mainly what you'll find here is differences. So think about how for Dakin, in many ways, it's more open and it's more overt, and it's something that actually provides him with power. Whereas for Posner, it kind of links into his marginalization, how he suffers kind of because of this. Okay, so go through. I would suggest you spend about 25-30 minutes just kind of going over the play, picking out the various bits that kind of link in and are going to allow you to discuss their kind of sexuality and the way that Bennett depicts it differently through each character and what is different about each. And then I'll go through and I'll pick out some of the main points, okay? Okay, hopefully you've had a proper look. These are some of the bits that I'd kind of pick out myself, but there is lots of other bits you could use. And when you come to doing your coursework, you should be using the whole play. Everybody will be picking out different bits, okay? So we start off with kind of Posner, and before it's ever made kind of clear, pardon me, that he's gay, it's made clear by kind of, it's not made clear even, it's alluded to his kind of marginalized nature within the text. So if you look at page 5, Posner is kind of the dictionary boy. When Hector wants a word looking up for the rest of them, Posner will look it up. Useless knowledge, the autois, and he points at Posner, and Posner kind of reads out this definition: serving no practical purpose, without function. And it does kind of link into Posner, his own kind of position within the text, the way that he kind of sees himself. And the other one, sorry, further up, he also looks up euphemism, the substitution of mild or vague or roundabout expression for harsh or directive one. So that kind of idea of language hiding the reality becomes important, and it reflects onto Posner as well. So Bennett having these two illusions, having him look up these two words, both of them serve to start to kind of characterize Posner as a figure here, as part of it as well. Now, if you look at page 7, beyond the kind of dictionary looking up, he's using these kind of intertextual allusions as well. So the boys, as part of Hector's class, they just start, I wish you lot did this, they start to spontaneously kind of quote King Lear to him. So the reference kind of Kent and Edgar, their King Lear bits. And Posner takes on the Edgar role within this. And the last line that he's kind of left with within this: the weight of this sad time we must obey, speak what we feel, not what we ought to say. And the intertextual reference there can be used to kind of suggest a couple of different things. The kind of the idea, the metaphorical weight of this sad time that he must obey, that kind of societal pressure essentially is the illusion potentially. And speak what we feel, not what we ought to say. There's a desire to kind of break away from this, to speak what they feel, not what kind of things are pressuring them to say. So the intertextual allusion, the link into King Lear, is important here. Bennett is shaping this. He's choosing which characters to kind of place these allusions with, and each of those is linked into the kind of significant effect that they kind of have. Okay. So as opposed to kind of Posner, you get Dakin on the other side, and Dakin is kind of different in terms of his inhibitions. He's kind of uninhibited sexually. So if we kind of skip to the brothel scene, Remember, this is just going to be very brief. It's Dakin who kind of takes his trousers off in front of the class. He's perfectly willing in front of a class with a teacher there to just take his trousers off as part of the kind of the role play of this scene. And it's all about establishing early on the differences between the two. These initial points of characterization are important. It shows Dakin as far more kind of unabashed, unashamed, and far more open in this sense. Then we go to kind of page 21. This will be my next bit that I kind of pick out. And Posner shows a kind of a self-awareness here. He's not, he's not blind to his own marginalization, the way that others treat him and kind of respond to him. So you get one of those important points within it that Bennett has quite a few times, where you get this kind of breaking of the fourth wall, this kind of almost more kind of soliloquizing, but not quite. So Posner, halfway down page 21, because I was late growing up, I'm not included in this kind of conversation. I'm not supposed to understand. Actually, they would be surprised how much I know about them and their bodies and everything else. So Posner is kind of depicted around the rest of them as, or they view him as being kind of more naive. They view him as being different, but he kind of shows that he does have an awareness, that he does know about them, and the reference to the bodies suggests a kind of more sexualized interest that he kind of hides. Scripts just under that, again, he's breaking the fourth wall. He's kind of talking to the audience. The rest of the characters on stage don't hear this. It's almost more of an aside. Dakin's navel, I remember, was small and hard, like an unripe blackberry. Posner's navel was softer and more like that of the eponymous orange. Posner envied Dakin his navel and all the rest of them. That this envy might amount to love does not yet occur to Posner, as to date it has only caused him misery and dissatisfaction. So Scripps here kind of reveals to us Posner's attraction, his attraction to Dakin, that this is love, that this is something emotional is important, but that it's causing him pain, misery and dissatisfaction. So it's not an empowering emotion for Posner, and you get the kind of direct comparison between the two kind of navels, the genital areas, and for Dakin, his is kind of, it's unripe at this present time. It's going to grow into ripeness, whereas for Posner, it's kind of softer. The orange, it's something kind of, with the outer skin, something protected. You could go into the kind of idea of the orange within that. Okay, what's the next one? Yeah, so this is kind of continued. If you go on to page 29, Dakin is talking about, I'm beginning to like him more. Who, me? Irwin, though he hates me. So there's this kind of puppy dog attraction within Posner. He's desperate to be the subject of somebody else's affection, primarily here Dakin's affection, but he's overlooked, essentially, and overlooked for Irwin. And again, we get the implication of pain that goes with this. Oh, Scripsy, I can't bear to listen, but I want to hear every word. What does that mean? Now, you get the kind of appeal to Scripps, the kind of interjection, the O, suggesting his pain here, that he's doesn't necessarily fully understand his own kind of emotional state as well. What does that mean? It's left rhetorical. We as the audience kind of can understand, but he himself doesn't, in his attraction. And then again, the intertextual allusion becomes important. This time we have the kind of reference to Bewitched, that he's kind of having sung here, singing at this point. Very often it's Posner who's singing at the piano. If you quickly look up the lyrics to it, hang on, I'll find it for you quickly. Sorry, it's Bewitched, Bothered and Bewildered is the kind of full title of the song. It's originally Ella Fitzgerald's. Hang on. Okay, so when you're looking at this, the kind of, first thing to note is as he's singing it, he's placing himself in the kind of female position. And it's essentially a song of unrequited love, and love that's kind of paining again. I'm wild again, beguiled again, a simpering, whimpering child again, bewitched, bothered and bewildered am I. Couldn't sleep, wouldn't sleep, when love came and told me I shouldn't sleep. So it reflects his own kind of personal state here, that he's essentially beguiled by Dakin, but it's an unrequited kind of love. And have a look at the whole of the lyrics. You can kind of link them in here, but there's various bits that could be sung at this point. All the Bennett even says is that Posner sings a verse or two of this, so it's different adaptations will have different verses that are kind of focused in on. Right, then we have so Dakin here initially, he fancies Irwin essentially, or he's attracted to Irwin, and these are initially far more veiled. They are hidden in the same way as kind of Posner's are, but even then, in comparison, they're far more overt than Posner as well. So if you go to page 38, again, you get these links in, these associations that Bennett makes to other kind of authors, poets, things like this. So through this discourse with Irwin, Dakin has sort of an alluded to kind of test the waters, reference into Auden. I think he was more like Mr. Hector, sir, a bit of a shambles. He snogged his pupils, Auden, sir, not Mr. Hector. You know more about him than I do. And then he kind of quotes from him, lay your sleeping head, my love, human on my faithless arm. That was a pupil, sir. Shocking, isn't it? Now, it's a kind of veiled suggestion at this point, but that reference into Auden does become a kind of a test of the waters, essentially. That's what kind of Bennett's suggesting through it. Right, and the kitten's helping again. Okay, so then we go back to kind of Posner, and you're on to kind of page 42. Now, the exchange with Irwin is one that we'll come back to in a little bit in relation to section 28, but the bit that I'm interested at the moment at the bottom of page 42, the lines that people like to kind of continually reference. I'm a Jew, I'm small, I'm homosexual, and I live in Sheffield, I'm fucked. Now, within this, you potentially want to be able to kind of talk around how it shows this self-awareness of the different factors that are limiting in his kind of life chances, essentially. He's where he lives, Sheffield, his religion, his sexuality, all of them, and his kind of physicality, all of these lead into a kind of sense of marginalisation, and he's aware of that as part of it. So Bennett kind of gives him as a character a sense of himself. And you kind of can compare in back to Dakin. This is where we're going to look at next. Hang on. Right, sorry, the cat started biting the laptop at that point. So, where are we to next? Dun, 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 dun. Dun, 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 dun. Okay, yeah, sorry, we're just going to skip past that and come back to that in a little bit. I've done this slightly wrong order. I might have done this in slightly the wrong order, but no, because that's another bit I'm going to go back to. Right, apologies as I talk to myself. I should have paused this while we're doing it. Yeah, so 76 and on to page 77. Okay, so okay, sorry, I'm not doing very well being coherent today. If you look on page 76, again, you get the kind of more vague flirtation with Irwin, but it's still more overt as compared to kind of Posner. Never mind, coach, he pats him on the back. We still love you, even if you are a bit flash. So you get, again, moving in that physical contact on stage as a stage direction between Irwin and kind of Dakin. So it is kind of more overt. The touching on stage can be kind of played out as part of that. Scripps refers to it, you flirt. And Dakin kind of furthers this with kind of, I don't understand, I've never wanted to please anyone the way I do him. So that desire there is kind of, again, more overtly stated. And as you go on to page 80, down towards the bottom of it, I wondered about that. I might bring a little sunshine into his life. It's only a wank after all. What makes you think he'd do it with you? And then Dakin smiles, you complacent fuck. So Dakin's kind of sexual confidence here is kind of brought out again. It's far more kind of overt and directly sexualized, the language. The focus is on the physical act. It's only a wank. Scripps' response is kind of important. You know, Dakin smile and then you complacent fuck. The idea that Dakin sees himself as kind of irresistible is implied here by Bennett. But again, it's about selling up that kind of confidence within him. So, yeah, as this is kind of opposed to Posner, who is more focused kind of on the more emotional side of this. So if you go down towards the bottom, and actually, I've popped down page 80, but it's page 81. Posner's kind of far more perceptive on the emotional level. Irwin does like him. He seldom looks at anyone else, because nor do I. Our eyes meet looking at Dakin. And then Scripps again. Scripps' response is important. Oh, Pos, you with your spaniel heart, it will pass. Yes, it's only a phase. Who says I want it to pass? But the pain. So he's not necessarily attracted in the same physical sense. You've got the focus on the heart as a kind of symbol of attraction, and of something more emotional, on this sort of soft spaniel heart here. So he's placed in comparison to Dakin. And again, you get this kind of contrast for Posner, who is more fixed in his sexuality. It's different here, essentially. He's in pain and suffering through it, whereas Dakin doesn't seem to really experience this. It's far more kind of pleasurable for him. Last bit around this, just to point out, then we'll look at a couple of other bits. So for Dakin, again, rather than it being anything to do with kind of, again, emotional, sex for him and his own sexuality can be used to kind of reward other people as a kind of, it becomes a commodity. It's for Dakin, his sexuality is more about power than kind of human connection. So on page 103, you get that kind of the hug that he gifts to kind of Posner here. Now look, this is known as Posner's reward, and he hugs Posner, and there's a kind of anticlimactic nature to it almost. Posner wants a second one. I was looking for something more lingering, and he does give him the second hug, but again, there's a kind of limitation within this. Posner doesn't get what he truly wants here. He's left kind of on an anticlimactic note at the end of it. And you get the same thing. And is that Hector's reward? So he's willing to ride the bike again with Hector. It's his body, his sexuality. It's a reward for other people. It's also a way of kind of gratifying himself. It's not to do with the kind of same emotional connections. For Dakin, it's more something kind of selfish in a sense here. So in terms of this, if you were doing the kind of gender and sexuality question, you can do quite a lot around Dakin and Posner. You can kind of compare them as figures. So when Bennett's dealing with their sexuality, he depicts their sexualities in different ways. He shows how they're either an empowering factor or a kind of limiting factor. They are, in many ways, Posner and Dakin are kind of the foil to each other in a sense. Like we've talked about with kind of Hamlet and things like this, they contrast one another, with Dakin's physical, overt dealing with his sexuality, whereas Posner's more kind of hidden aspect to it. Okay, a couple of other bits we want to just do before we kind of close off. So to start with education and coming out, you just need to quickly look up, hopefully you've already found this, so you might not even need to look it up, but just remind yourself what Margaret Thatcher and Section 28 are exactly. Okie dokie. So, Margaret Thatcher with Section 28 is basically, well, homosexuality has been decriminalised, but Margaret Thatcher under Section 28 means that it's promotion, which is kind of an ambiguous term in this context, within schools is kind of forbidden, essentially. You cannot promote homosexuality within schools, and any kind of then touching on it as an issue becomes a kind of area that's kind of a potential minefield for a teacher, essentially. Now, within the context of the text, this is very important in relation to the way that kind of Bennett depicts Posner's character development, because Posner, a character depicted as kind of exploring his sexuality, is given no kind of reinforcement, is given no kind of support through his kind of teachers, his education, and he suffers because of this. So Bennett is kind of essentially, as a contextual point, showing us just how damaging Section 28 is to people. So we'll just pick out a few kind of key bits in relation to this. And the first one is that kind of exchange with Irwin on page 41 on to page 43. Okay. And what I want you to do, just very quickly, read back over it. Look at the ways in which Bennett suggests that Irwin, even though Irwin himself is gay, he suggests that Irwin is kind of trapped here, that he can offer no kind of positive reinforcement to Posner. He can offer no kind of support to him. Okay, so just quickly have a quick glance back over it, and then I'll point out a few bits in a moment. Right, so essentially here you get this kind of split scene. Irwin is talking to Lintart whilst kind of narrating to her, and we kind of see it directly on stage, his exchange with Posner from earlier. Now, what you'll note about kind of Irwin's discourse here is that a lot of it is made up of interrogatives itself. So he kind of quotes, does Dakin know? Do you think it's a phase? Where he can't kind of offer anything concrete to Postner, because if he does, it would be running foul of Section 28. So he can, with Postner kind of coming out here to him, he can only kind of respond in this very limited fashion. He can offer no kind of sympathy to it. And he kind of describes to Linter, I sympathised, though not so much as to suggest I might be in the same boat. So his attitude is sympathetic, but there's a suggestion that he's repressing his own sexuality. He can't kind of expose his own sexuality to Posner in order to provide a kind of positive reinforcement and role model within that. And yeah, is there anything else I want from this bit? No, I think that kind of captures the general sense of that as a section. So his response is clearly depicted by Bennett as limited, and this is then potentially going to be situated as damaging. And we then get this kind of almost connection with Hector as well. So Hector has just been kind of forced to retire. He's going to be forced to retire at the end of the year. And following on from that, you have his exchange with Postner, and both of them on their own here. And again, I know we talked about this briefly in class. The Drummer Hodge poem becomes important as, again, another intertextual allusion. And the idea of kind of this discussion around this figure who historically would have been left nameless, who is kind of young to the point of kind of Postner's age. And here he's kind of, Hex says what's important, he is given a name, that he's not kind of neglected and left off. So hang on. Okay, so in terms of this kind of discussion of the poem, onto page 55 here as out of the section. So thrown into a common grave though he may be, he's still Drummer Hodge. Lost boy though he is, on the other side of the world, he still has a name. So there's a parallel here to both Postner and to Hector. They're both kind of lost boys within this world, but they still have a name. They're still worthy of recognition, is kind of what Bennett is suggesting here. And you then get Hector's discussion, which seems kind of trivial initially, about the compound adjective use at the bottom of page 55, this one. A compound adjective formed by using un in front of the noun or verb, of course. Unkissed, unrejoicing, unconfessed, unembraced. And he's kind of continuing this discussion. There's a kind of Freudian aspect to this, of Hector reflecting his own suppressed feelings here through this kind of listing of these compound adjectives, and it links into Postner's as well. And again, as he's discussing the poem onto page 56 here, whether because of diffidence or shyness, but a holding back, not being in the swim, can you see that? What he's kind of suggesting here is that a lot of this poetry, a lot of this kind of literature is holding back emotion, it's hiding it. And this all kind of leads, and there's other bits you could pick out through this, but this leads to the quite long stage direction, which holds a lot of relevance here. He puts out his hand, and it seems for a moment as if Postner will take it, or even that Hector may put it on Postner's knee, but the moment passes. So there's this potential moment between the pair of them, but it's suppressed. It's not allowed to happen. because potentially again linking to that section 28, that suppression. Hector is an older man. He will have lived through the time when homosexuality is illegal. So all of this feeds into that lack of connection that Posner is then offered. And what we get then, as a kind of last point for this slide, you want to think about the section on page 60 on to page 62. And this is a section, it's left out of the film version, but I think it's very important here because it shows the long-term consequences, I'd say it's Bennett showing us what happens when you get a policy like Section 28, what kind of damage it can cause. So this is at the start of kind of Act 2, and you get that flash forward. So it's also going to allow you to talk about structure in the play as part of it. And you've got Irwin, and Irwin's now a television presenter, and he's presenting history programs. And this anonymous man appears, okay? And initially we're unaware of this man as being Posner. So it potentially suggests just how much Posner's changed, or the kind of anonymity he's sort of grown into almost. You get references to Posner having a counsellor. So it is suggesting kind of mental health problems at this stage. And the important bit here is that he's still pursuing Irwin, and the implication is that this is kind of, 5-10 years down the line. He's still pursuing Irwin, looking for a sense of legitimacy around his own sexuality. He still wants to find out about Irwin and Dakin. So if you look on page 61, I didn't say anything about you and Dakin. Nothing happened between me and Dakin. I think it did. No, it's not true. You used to say that wasn't important. You liked him. So this whole exchange is sort of shaped to imply that Posner wants him to kind of admit basically to his attraction to Dakin, because if he admits to his attraction to Dakin, it means that Posner is not himself an anomaly. He's not kind of, how to kind of express it. He's not the same marginal individual that he's maybe seen himself as, okay? But Irwin is still refusing at this stage to admit it to him, and arguably that's kind of leading to the damage that's done. Okay. So again, nice way to get in a contextual point around this. This can lead you to talk about both, the dangers of education. It can also lead you into talking about kind of sexuality. If you're doing the abuse question, it potentially offers you an angle on how the teachers are only indirectly abusive to the students, and it's not that they're necessarily choosing to be abusive, but the whole school system is forcing them essentially to be abusive. Right, so okay, so in terms of kind of the bit on page 98 to 99, it becomes far more overt in terms of kind of Dakin pursuing Irwin. Now, again, think about the performance we went to see in Newcastle. If you want to watch the kind of the History Boys version of it again, think about the kind of physical proximity between the two here. Dakin, comes very close into Irwin's personal space. There is a kind of almost an aggressive pursuit at this point. And there's a kind of challenge around it. On page 99, is that a euphemism? It is, isn't it? Saying have a drink when you mean something else. And it starts to kind of develop, and you get the kind of more vulgar language coming through as you kind of go down. I'm just kicking the tires on this one, but further to the drink, what I was really wondering was whether there was any circumstance in which there was any chance of your sucking me off. Now, this is important. in that it's made overt, it's Dakin's suggestion, not Irwin's, that the suggestion as well is one that's more kind of about Dakin's pleasure than Irwin's pleasure as well, as part of it. And again, just think about how this kind of progresses through, how he's kind of pursuing him over it. So as we go further through, okay, as you go down to the bottom of page kind of 100, why are you so bold in argument and talking, but when it actually comes to the point, when it's something that's actually happening, I mean, now you're so fucking careful. Is it because you're a teacher and I'm a boy? Obviously that. So Dakin here, that kind of questioning to Irwin, the interrogative, he's kind of suggesting that Irwin is kind of showy. He will make controversial points, but actually acting in a controversial way is not something that kind of comes naturally to him. So it's kind of potentially damaging around this. And again, is that what it is? Is that you don't want to be like Hector? You won't be. You can't be. How can you be? Hector's a joke. So he's kind of seeing Hector in a kind of as different from Irwin. Irwin has the potential to be different, but again, it's Dakin pushing this. He's pushing and pushing and pushing it. Sorry, and just kind of skipping ahead, again, there's other bits you could pick out from this exchange. We're just picking out the main bits. Look at the closing bit before the kind of scene transition. I think you did, and we're not in the subjunctive either. It is going to happen. So think about Dakin's utterances here. They're made quite short utterances. I think you did. We're not in the subjunctive either. It is going to happen. Each of them is a single kind of simple sentence. They are emphatic. And again, it's Dakin pushing it. It is going to happen. So for Dakin, his sexuality is all about kind of power. It's about kind of self-pleasure potentially a lot. And you can kind of link this in kind of various ways. Right, the last couple of bits, just draw your attention very quickly to the end of the play, and kind of Mrs. Lintott reflecting on the future for both of the boys. And in relation to this, we have Dakin. Another is a tax lawyer telling highly paid fibs and making frequent trips to the Gulf states. Dakin acknowledges, I like money, it's fun. So Dakin in his future life is given a kind of moral ambiguity, but he is given a success as well. So those Gulf states associated with a kind of corruption at this stage. He is a tax lawyer, highly paid fibs. So he has become like Irwin in terms of telling fibs for profit, essentially. And Posner, at the end, has ended up with a kind of different future. And still, this is right on the last page on 108. Still, of all Hector's boys, there is only one who truly took everything to heart, remembers everything he was ever taught, the songs, the poems, the sayings, the endings, the words of Hector never forgotten. But again, even in his future life, the focus is on the kind of the pain, essentially. He lives alone in a cottage he has renovated himself, has an allotment and periodic breakdowns, has a host of friends, though only on the internet, and none in his right name or even gender. So as we link back in, both Dakin and Posner have been affected by their adolescence, is the implication. They have taken the messages of the teachers, of the system as a whole, and it's changed their futures. Posner's is a bleak and empty future with a lack of kind of mental health associated with it. Now, that's the end in terms of the Bennett version, but the other thing to kind of think about, sorry, the overall conclusion I'll come back to in a minute, is just adaptations. Now, in the film adaptation, we have Posner becoming like a little mini Hector. He goes into teaching, and he's more restrained than Hector is, but it does suggest that this whole system is simply creating a cycle in which the same things happen over and over again, and Posner is kind of struggling to restrain himself in that context. So, very quickly, his overall conclusions. Well, Bennett is progressive. He's showing us these characters. He's showing us their struggles, though, as well, especially through Posner. He's showing us the kind of difficulty that's still faced. So, whilst it's not empowering in certain ways, it is important in kind of, again, Bennett pushing a view that we need to kind of look at the way that we are kind of dealing with issues of sexuality, look at the damage that we're potentially causing by repressing sexuality, by kind of closing it down. And he explores through the text the ways in which different characters use and are kind of contracted and hurt by their sexuality. Okay, that's all for today, people. Toodaloo.